Welcome to the ArcFlash podcast, sparking new ideas in the data center space. I'm Kevin
And
Abudi.
I'm Jabez Tan, and we're here to provide a balanced, nuanced, and hopefully unbiased view on the state and most pressing topics affecting the data center, hyperscale cloud, and AI industry. We want to see our industry succeed, but we're also not naive cheerleaders nor doomsayers. What we ultimately believe is the best way forward to see the industry experience sustainable growth is by addressing and being transparent with the challenges and sharing the key themes and trends that are unfolding in the sector. I've been covering this space as an industry analyst since 2011 and currently lead the data center and hyperscale research practice at Structure Research. And today is a really special episode because we have Phil Shih, who is my partner in crime here at Structure Research. He and I go way back to when we were, colleagues at a much bigger firm. So welcome, Phil.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And
Now, you're the origin of a lot of what we talk about and what we do. So this is a big episode,
I
right?
hope so. Yeah, I just dated yourself, Jabez, but also I'm just thinking back, to when we did first meet. That was a long time ago. Back like even before, well, 2010, 11, right? So,
mhm,
oof.
exactly. Exactly. And so we're here to do this podcast because we just wrapped up a pretty amazing event in
Mhm.
Toronto, the Infrastructure Summit, which Kevin attended. Kevin spoke at our event. Phil, you ran most of the agenda and led the charge for this event. So just give us a snapshot, a recap of how do you think the event went? What was your vision going into that week? And just share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. And, for those of you, listening to this podcast who were there and participated, this year or in other years, thanks so much for the support. It's what makes the event happen. And we wouldn't be a great event without the great minds in the sector, the great perspectives, and that's ultimately what we try to bring together. And I think is unique about our event is that Jabez, you talk about being neutral, being fair, being kind of not doomsdayers, but also not cheerleaders. That's the kind of ethic and approach we try to bring to this event, and how we curate the agenda. It's not meant to be a sales event. It's not meant to be, very vendor heavy. Everybody, even the great sponsors that support our event are out there to provide insights, education, knowledge. And again, we all have a stake in the sector. Some people have bigger stakes than others, but we all have a stake in the success, and we all want to see it succeed. So yeah, absolutely. Shout out to everybody who was there. I mean, so much happened. Every year, we create this agenda, and I actually don't get to see a lot of what is put together because I'm, running around, going doing my own sessions. But I'm able to drop in on others. Sorry, Kevin, I didn't get to see you. You participate at all. But
Next
yeah,
year,
next year, and,
next
and
year.
but last year I did. And Jabez, snuck in on Jabez a few times to see what he was doing. But usually, he's doing just fine. So, but yeah, I mean, so maybe a bit of a kind of a recap will be a little slanted to what I was actually able to see, not being able to virtualize myself and be in multiple rooms. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the. I mean, if I were to pick out some of the main themes, as context and backdrop, I think what was different this year from perhaps some other years when we maybe the years 18 and 19 when we kicked off this event, was a completely different backdrop from a macroeconomic perspective, and compound, which was kind of a byproduct of the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, but probably a more, I don't want to say negative, but just a bit more of a kind of a cautious and slower and somewhat more sluggish environment. We weren't talking about hyperscale growth like we were in 1819, which was rapidly transforming the industry then, and everything was like guns a blazing. Every the sector was growing fast, pushing forward. you know this year, was a bit different, right? So, growth has come down. Jabez presented, both of us presented kind of data points on where the, trajectory of hyperscale cloud has gone, which has, of course, a big impact on a whole bunch of different segments and parts of the ecosystem. The M&A discussions, there's strategic discussions, talked about interest rates, how that's impacted the M&A environment, how that's slowed down. So you can see kind of that effect that the environment has had. And that kind of backdrop was, I think, people were well aware of it, no matter what part of no matter what track you were participating, which kind of topic you were sitting in on. And we do provide, as a side note, we do definitely try to provide a very ecosystem wide kind of perspective on the sector. So everything from real estate, data centers to hyperscale clouds and MSPs, managed infrastructure serving SMB all the way up to enterprise. So yeah, so that I think that was kind of the really interesting thing. And then of course every year we try to pick a theme, and so the theme kind of matched up with this backdrop, which was recalibration. So not just in terms of kind of the world coming out of the pandemic and the macro environment, but also how that impacted IT decision makers and how they will evaluate, consume, and procure infrastructure. So Jabez did a whole bunch of great stuff on what enterprises are seeing and saying and doing around their IT strategies. And so recalibration, I think also kind of tried to capture that essence of optimization that's happening with a lot of end users. Recalibration, we use the word realignment as well, because this environment has created a lot of incentives for certain assets within the industry to be realigned. We saw this week, or was it last week, with the Sectera assets being moved. So that's another example of certain portfolios hitting certain kind of inflection points, or and hitting a certain point in their life cycle or in their lifespan where they need to be moved, optimized, realigned, recalibrated for future growth. It's not something like sitting here in Toronto. It's not like a BlackBerry. It's not something that's going to disappear and be replaced by something. And so that's kind of infrastructure service is a very different animal, and that's kind of why we wanted to talk about these kinds of words to capture what's kind of going on in the space. And so I just rambled on for like 5 to 10 minutes, and I didn't actually say AI. Well, I just did it, but
Well, we've been talking about it plenty
yeah.
on our past
So I didn't
episodes
want
too.
to.
So I think it helps to spread our wings a
Yeah,
bit
I
too.
didn't want to start with that. I felt like the context is always really important. And so, we do feel the sector just with everything that's come together over the last decade around, public cloud growth, then the pandemic, going through that, 3-year stretch or so, the macro environment that was created, coming out of that, and then now, I think more potential inflection points coming, and I think AI represents, is probably the biggest representation of that. So, you saw a lot of slowdowns, a lot of slowing in the sector's growth just after things opened up. Um, and then all of a sudden we're talking about more explosive growth, something that looks similar. I shouldn't say like the growth potential and potential trajectory looks similar, if not greater, than what we saw with hyperscale, but is also an extension and byproduct of what's happened in hyperscale. So yeah, I mean that was pervasive across not just discussions that Jabez led, but also we were talking about it in some tracks, talking about it in the context of MSPs and managed public cloud, how those services can kind of accelerate the growth in those sectors, which increasingly kind of were built off more commodity type offerings, infrastructure resale, but are now being pushed by adoption and value add products and services, and which AI represents a lot of, but also the use of those tools being the incentive to adopt cloud. So I think that was really interesting, because I think if you've been to kind of any sector conference over the last 15, 20 years, we always talk about how far along are we, how much upside is there, enterprise adoption of infrastructure services. We've used the baseball analogy endlessly, and for years it's moved from the first inning to the second inning, and I think it was pretty different this year. I mean, we think in many cases some of the data points we presented show a significant amount of movement over the last decade, more I should say more than a decade, to where kind of that low hanging fruit, kind of that early stage adoption has moved, quite well on its way. and the industry's become a lot more mature. There's a lot less of the low hanging fruit. Now it's about driving value on top of infrastructure. So I would say that was another big picture theme that I hope was discussed, debated in many different ways, across all the sessions. Um, yeah. So from a research perspective, I mean, those were some of the highlights. I mean, there was probably more that I'm missing. I think it was a good time. It's great to see people. Yeah, the weather was okay. Early October in Toronto can sometimes be a little chilly, but I think we got some brilliant weather. The patio was open, which is always nice. Yeah, and I would say a lot of new faces, which is always something we strive for, to bring different companies, different voices. We have our regulars, of course, Kevin, like yourself, but brought a lot of new faces and new companies. I think global participation was up from last year, especially. I think last year was extremely difficult for kind of global participation, but this year we had participation from Asia, from the UK, Europe, continental Europe, some visitors from South America, which was great, which is an area that we're trying to spend more time in. So, yeah, definitely. I've always tried to push um, a global event with global topics and a global audience. And I know travel can be challenging, but I think we did a decent job of that, and hope to do better. Um, Next year and the years after that. We certainly aren't planning to go away, but want to take this to another level. Maybe I'll stop there.
Well, so let's delve a little more deeply into some of those
Yeah.
topics, right? Because you just covered a ton of ground right there. So one thing that you brought up is the financing of the sector, which has been something that's been on my mind. And at the show, I was talking to a few folks about this, about getting more creative in a high interest rate
Hmm.
environment, how as an industry we're going to finance a lot of what we're doing. And so one thing that's been starting to become more prevalent is asset-backed securitization, right? And that comes in a few forms. There's the CMBS market for buildings themselves. There's the ABS market. Some people are doing that against their DGXs. Um, a lot of equity still trying to get in the sector from a variety of places, whether that be pension funds, whether that be private equity, whether that be sovereign wealth, you name it. Any feelings as to what the mix is going to be here going forward, how things are going to look, what some of the creativity is going to entail?
Yeah, no, that's a great, and thanks for making it open-ended, not making it an open-ended question, not being super finance guy, if you want to describe it. But I do think that trend that you identified, kind of where the people who participate in this ecosystem, the interest, the capital that's coming in continues to come from those types of places, long-term investors, infrastructure funds, pension funds, private equity, as at least that part of the market. You've seen this shift where kind of the what we used to call wholesale hyperscale data center market, has pretty much seen most of private equity investors exit. You remember Abry Partners not that long ago was just crushing it in the space, was backing a lot of the kind of successful and growing platforms, and they don't really invest in this part of the market anymore. They've kind of taken a different approach, are looking in the middle, and even gravitated over to managed infrastructure, just because the profile, the returns, capital requirements, everything has shifted so dramatically. Yeah, so yeah, I think you'll continue to see that. It's not that those participants will go away. Like I said, Abry's a good example of a company that is just looking for different opportunities, maybe different, market openings in the marketplace, market inefficiencies. And I think you'll continue to see that as well. But in terms of hyperscale, I think you'll continue to see, this transition on a global basis. Um, yeah, I don't see that kind of slowing down, again, because of how what is necessary to get involved with the build, just to get involved with this sector, and to you know finance land acquisition, permitting, and to have the patience to see it through to the end.
Yeah. And Phil, you talked earlier about
Hmm.
that there were people coming in from Asia, from South America. You talked a little bit about some of the demographics that attended the event, but also wanted to give you a chance to lay out the vision for who we try to attract at this event. What are their profiles? Is it operator? Is it vendor? Is it finance? Like what is the
Yeah.
mix that attended this event? Has it changed over the last few years, and where is it headed in your opinion?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's a good segue from, the question that Kevin posed. So our event is, our or one of our earliest taglines was it's built for operating service provider executives. And they will always be at the center of this event. They remain, the primary, the dominant audience. I'd say, 50, 60% are, maybe even a little more are operating service provider executives. And we try to create an environment for them to learn, to network, to get business done. And when they come to get business done, they're typically looking at two other types of audiences, which is on the one side we call vendors, which is technology oriented products, software, hardware, services, and then finance and real estate, which might be actually two buckets. But traditionally, we've actually usually just had finance and a little bit of real estate, but now finance and real estate, real estate is becoming a bigger component of that group. But those are the three kind of main audiences that we try to bring together, and we always again place the operating service provider at the center of that ecosystem, since they are driving the decisions that make or break what finance, real estate, and suppliers ultimately achieve in the sector. Um, so yeah, and those groups come to our event, I feel, not just to communicate, interact, and network with operating executives, but to also see kind of what the sector, from their perspective, from the executive's perspective, what's going on in the space, to try to keep tab on trends, to understand the growth opportunities, what operating executives are thinking, what they're kind of worried about, what they're optimistic about. So if you bring that mix together, and I think that's, honestly, if I don't, toot my horn too much, I think that's what makes our event unique, and what makes it really effective is that it does bring those different perspectives. You have events that are very, very heavy towards, say, finance, and you have some events that are very heavy towards kind of vendor. We feel that the way to go, to have a really truly productive event, you need to kind of bring that together and have those different parts of the sector interact. That's why our event is not meant to be, massive. It's not meant to be expo style. It's meant to be more collegial, more intimate. That we like tight venues where you don't have to walk great distances, where people can bump into each other. Kind of like that physical aspect of just being close together. I think personifies what we're trying to create, which is bringing these different kind of parts of the sector together that sometimes, quite frankly, have difficulty, communicating or finding each other. That's always been a trademark of our space, especially back, when I started covering it a couple of decades ago, which is like nobody knew each other. Nobody know who to talk to. So people might know a company name, but they may ask like, so who's behind this, company? Who are these guys? Those questions were pretty common back in the day. And then, because the sector is young and new, a new, say, you know, um, a new software company that has something to offer to operators, will come into the sector and say, hey, what's this? And have to pretty much start at ground zero, and get ramped up to do their job effectively. Same with, associates or investment associates who are joining firms and, may have never come across, may have come across digital infrastructure, but moved here either with no background or came from kind of a connectivity or telco background, wireless background. So I think that there's constant learning required. There's a lot of learning required to get up to speed in our space, and then our sector changes quite a bit, as you well know. And I think it's that's why this kind of environment, I think, is useful, so that people can also be aware of how fast it's changing. And you don't want to, we hate it when people go to an event that when you feel like you don't sometimes you go to an event and you don't feel like you got too much out of it, or the typical complaint, well, I've heard all that before. Hopefully people come to our event and don't come with that takeaway, like, hey, if you can go home with a few takeaways, like, I didn't know that was going on, or I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, or wow, that discussion was really kind of opened up my eyes, or set off some light bulbs, and then I feel we've done our job. And yeah, that's hopefully what we can continue to do.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it makes our event and events like the RBC Capital events and the TD Cowen
Mm,
events so unique and so desirable is because is an extension of what we do day to day. Like, we're a research firm; those guys are
mm,
equity research analysts, so they're speaking with executives day to day basis. I mean, the only bias that we have and most of these other investment banks have is they want to sell research to you. So we want to sell research to our audience. I mean, that's no secret. But the only way we can sell research is if we can show that we can think critically and about the sector
mm,
and produce insights that are relevant. And so that's really where we're coming from. We're not an events company where we have to sort of be sponsor driven, so sponsors will
mm.
dictate the agenda, which can affect the quality of the content a lot of times. And so I think that's really a unique part about not just our event but other similar types of events that happen across the world. And I think we're about to hit time here, so maybe I want to give Kevin the ability to close it out. And Phil shared a bunch about his thoughts on the event, but Kevin, you being an outsider, kind of third party operating executive, you've been to other events in the space as well. What are some of the key takeaways that you took from our event in comparison with some of the other events that you've been to?
Well, I think overwhelmingly, we've talked about some of the changes that are in flux in the industry already on this episode and past episodes. I think this is more where at infrastructure was more like, okay, we already know this is happening. It was more of a question of let's get down to how we are going to do something about it. And those were the kind of conversations I was having with different potential partners, different current partners, just sort of other thought leaders that we could have those conversations. Say, okay, we've all recognized what's going on here. Now we have to execute as an industry. What have we done to address rack density concerns? What have we done to source power in different places? And those are the kind of conversations I could have honestly with a lot of folks in the area, because as both of you mentioned, it was a slightly different environment than most. It felt like a very high level environment, and it has in past years as well. And so I felt like I could have those conversations without too much distortion, and so that was very helpful to me.
Yeah, great to hear that. Um, I think that that's the one. I think if I could share, I mean, I won't name the person, but just to share the ultimate compliment, one of the executives was actually annoyed that they had meetings and we're missing some of the good content, some of the good sessions, and so yeah, I think that's hopefully that speaks well to what we've done, which is to create to create not just a great environment, but again, get those takeaways, those insights through independent third-party content that we drive with, of course, participation from the likes of yourself, Kevin, and others.
Fabulous. I love it. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. We'll tune in with another episode next week. Take care.
Cheers.